here at the Clark County Fairgrounds, home of the Clark County Fair. I think I'm a bit early. So you've spent years and lots of money on lessons, pipes, chanters, accessories, kilt, uniform, piping schools. Maybe you joined a pipe band, which is a very expensive hobby. Maybe it's time to make some money back. Paying gigs can be very fun and profitable if you know how to get them. Let's take a look at each of these categories individually. Funerals. Sorry to start off with a bit of a downer, but these actually are some of the easiest gigs for pipers in general. Quite often you'll only be playing Amazing Grace and possibly some other tunes. Some good tune choices to know: Amazing Grace, of course, Flowers of the Forest, Skyboat Song. A lot of slow airs will work, especially if you have to play as people arrive or leave, which does happen sometimes. The best way to get these kind of gigs is to go around to all the funeral homes in your area, take cards, flyers, give them your website. You can even go in your kilt if you want to make a little bit more of an impression. Let them know you're available. Sometimes you'll get these through a talent agency too, but either your local Scottish import shop or the funeral home will be the most likely place that you'll get a call from. I get there 20 minutes early, find the officiant, and check in where they want you, what they want you to play, how long, cues, all that stuff. And that should be about it. Be ready to play a little longer. Sometimes people take their time at these events, and if they want you to play as people are leaving, until everybody's gone, be prepared to have a few tunes ready, and you can cover the whole thing. So I'm up here in Mount Hood. Seems to be a lot of people with our slidey sticks around here, all over. Thought this would be a good place for some reason to recount a little story. I was playing a funeral once and standing off to the side waiting for my cue, and a guy came up who was late to the funeral, stood beside me for a second, asked me, "What do you wear under the kilt?" Of course I said shoes, and he immediately burst out laughing. The entire crowd turned around and stared at me, of course. Needless to say, I didn't get a tip that day. Better learn that tune. Probably the most common piping gig is for weddings. I'm sure you've heard of that a lot and probably seen some. These can be a little stressful and complicated, but you can usually end up charging more because of that. I'll go over advertising and pricing for these later. Typically what will happen is you'll get a call from an agent or the bride or the groom, maybe a coordinator, asking your availability and pricing. I usually try to hold off on giving a price out until I find out how much I'm going to be working there. Sometimes they're pretty involved and pretty long. You might have to go to the reception as well. So try and hold off on that till you get a clear idea of what they want. And then typically you'd set up a meeting with the bride and groom, hopefully, to go over tune choices, cues, how they want the pipes used, basically, in the entire ceremony. Typically, some of the ways it'll be used will be playing outside the church as people arrive. You'll be playing for part of the bridal party going down, like the bridesmaids going down the aisle, stop and play the processional for the bride, then play the recessional for playing them out, and maybe playing a while outside as people are leaving. These are all optional, of course. There's quite a lot of changes and possibilities involved with that. Some of the tunes you should definitely know is, besides the Bridal March we just heard, Scotland the Brave, of course. Highland Cathedral is a very good one, kind of stately sounding. A People like the feel of that one quite a bit. A few slow airs, of course. I always suggest the Highland Wedding March, even though that's something that probably nobody's ever heard. Sometimes they print a program with the titles of the music all through the ceremony listed, and that does look really good if that's used. And you don't have to play the whole thing even. Probably you could get away with just a couple of parts if you're not familiar with that tune. So I was playing a wedding a very long time ago, and I was to be placed in a courtyard outside the church or whatever it was, and these double doors were to open, and that was my cue to start playing, and all the people were sitting right there. So I was tuning up down the block a ways, pipes are going great, got in position, doors opened, blew my pipes up, and not a sound came out of the chanter. Blew them a little harder, drone started to shut off, so I stopped, and meanwhile 200 people are staring at me. Pulled the chanter out, and a little piece of dried up seasoning had fallen directly on top of the reed. And I just pulled it off, put it back together, fired them up, and they went perfectly. It just goes to show you that anything can happen. So this is a bonus tip extra. So it's pretty easy these days to set up your pipes so that they're very stable, never go out of tune. One way to do it, of course, is to make sure your pipes are very dry. You can see by this picture here, this is the bottle system that I use. It's quite large, but it really takes care of the moisture. I can play all day at a dance competition and it never gets wet. I'm also using some MG drone reeds. A very old Troy chanter reed that just doesn't quit, probably because it never gets wet and just keeps going, and a Bannatyne synthetic bag, and that's my entire setup. Those reeds, those drone reeds, tend to work really well on my old Hendersons. Make sure you dry the desiccant in the canister if you're using that system. Quite often you're just harboring germs in there otherwise. And lastly, have your pipes set up fairly easy. Believe it or not, this is just a visual thing. Obviously it's going to be more comfortable for you to play, but when people are looking at somebody playing, they don't want to see somebody just struggling, looking like they're blowing the brains out trying to play these things. They should be looking comfortable and easy, and you'll probably get a bigger tip. Corporate gigs and private parties are quite similar a lot of the time. Mostly you are just background music, believe it or not. If you have small pipes, you might take them along because often people don't realize how loud the pipes are. I've had to play outside a window for an event because they were too loud and I was outside in the cold playing. These will usually be handled by an agent. So you'll have a contract, you'll know exactly how long you're playing, any breaks, all the real specific details that you should keep track of for that kind of gig. And that's about it. Those aren't that common, but they do come along, and quite often they can pay pretty well. If you have to play, say, an hour on and off as background music, you could make a substantial sum just for that. Corporations tend to pay pretty well. Busking. This will vary a lot depending on the town you're in. Some places have a permit system that you apply for and pay for, and you're allowed a certain amount of time in a certain area. Some places, especially with bagpipes, do not want them at all. So you just have to check with your local permit office and find out what they need for that. Sometimes these can be lucrative, but you generally have to play for a long time, many hours in a daytime situation. I tried busking once, downtown Portland, playing small pipes. I was competing with a girl in a bikini playing a sax, doing a hula hoop. I didn't make much that day. Playing in a Celtic band, Irish or Scottish band, this can be really rewarding, more of a long-term effort, obviously, because you're playing with other musicians. I will be doing a video totally dedicated to playing with other instruments coming up in a few months here. So we'll cover the details in that one. But in general, these can be a lot of fun. For a piper, it's probably a good idea to have a couple of other instruments. If you already play guitar or something, it's great. But as far as the pipe-related things, small pipes would be good. I actually use a carbon fiber whistle that has been designed for Highland pipe fingering, which is really handy. This one's in A, and that gives you another sound basically in your whole tonal palette. St. Patrick's Day. Basically it has its own little category here. Most pipers are quite busy, especially if they play in a pipe band. They're going to be doing a lot of gigs around St. Patrick's Day, or days as it is these days. You can do a lot of solo stuff too, though. A lot of bars want a piper to come in and just play briefly. A couple of gigs like that can be pretty profitable, and it takes a while to get them. Try not to overbook yourself. Parking, if you're downtown, in any town on St. Patrick's, is going to be a nightmare. Try not to drink anything until the end of the day, because that's going to even make things a lot harder. And if you're playing in a Celtic band, you can combine all these things and make quite a day of it, or days. I've definitely played more than 14 hours in a day doing different types of gigs for that occasion. Playing for Highland dance competitions. This one is a lot of work, can be a lot of work. A lot of people kind of shy away from it. I think it's a very important part of playing to at least do it part of the time. But there's quite a circuit, obviously, in the summertime. If you want to start playing those, you can make a fair bit of money every weekend, really, playing these kind of gigs. The previous little tip on getting your pipes really dry is well worth it on these ones. If you end up playing most of the day, you'll end up fighting your pipes if they get too wet. That is for sure. But stay tuned for the upcoming video on dance piping. Teaching. After you're at a certain level, of course, and you feel confident in your knowledge, you can start teaching, at least beginners in that. It's very rewarding, and can be profitable too. You can do classes or individual or both, and it's quite fun. So obviously you'll need a website, one with audio clips, lots of pictures. Any reviews people have given you are all great information. Have business cards, of course. Your local Scottish import store, any place that sells bagpipe parts or anything related like that, get to know them really well. Have cards there. Make sure that they know that you're available for anything that comes up for gigs. You can also check with any talent agencies in the area. Give them a call. Some of them might not be interested in that, but a lot of them will put you on their list just in case they do get a call, which happens once in a while. Find out their fees, probably a good idea. They might want a picture, but these days they'll probably just want a link to your website. And you could check with your local musicians union too. Now, depending on where you are in the country or what country, this can be good or nothing at all. They tend to be good for things like helping with paperwork if you're going across the border to play, that kind of thing. A lot of them do have a referral list too that people will be on, and chances are there won't be very many pipers in your area besides you. And now it's also a good idea to be able to take credit cards for payment. I always offer that, cash, check. When you're on the phone initially with the client, offer all those suggestions. Some people want to pay up front just to get out of the way so they don't have to worry about it on the day of a wedding or whatever. They may pay over the phone with a credit card or a PayPal. Any of these devices work really well these days. A word about pricing. This is a tough one. A $200 gig in the West Coast may be a $350 gig on the East Coast. So it really depends on where you are. The best way I've found is to contact or try to find out what other people charge. Not just pipers, but any soloists, like a say a classical guitar player that does a lot of weddings, a harpist, whatever, get an average of what they charge and do the same. To sum up, basically, if you want to do this, you can actually make a lot of money. If you want to make it a full-time career, just a part-time hobby, it'll all work. It does take a little perseverance to get your name out there. Along with that, though, I would try not to do many free gigs unless you think it's going to lead to something else. People tend to offer the exposure word as payment sometimes, but use your best judgment on that one. Anyway, have fun out there. I'm sure you can make some money, and good luck.